No capital C. Welcome to, oh, wait, sorry.
Okay.
Action. Good evening and welcome to the November 15th regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District. As always, our first agenda item is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you join in. Over there. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we do anything else, let me officially thank the Garrison Teachers Association for a lovely dinner and a lovely start to this meeting. Thank you so much. It was very generous, very thoughtful, and very much appreciated. So,
And delicious.
And delicious.
And we'd like to have it actually every week from now.
What's it doing next time? We have one presentation to start the meeting, and then thereafter a very brief bit of business to do. But the presentation we are starting with is one of the most important we do every year. It is a discussion of performance on our New York State standardized tests in mathematics and English language arts from 2017, that's last spring. In addition to which, this evening we will do a deeper dive into some reporting on our literacy efforts generally. And that presentation will be facilitated by several of our teachers who are most closely involved with that. So we invited parents, we made a special effort to invite parents to the presentations tonight. I know the board is eager to hear this. The board will discuss with John and the other presenters in real time as the presentation evolves, so feel free to participate as a board. We will also, if anyone is interested, who's come just for this presentation rather than wait for the public comment period, which typically closes the meeting, we'll take questions and conversation from members of the audience at the close of the presentation, but before we get into the business portion of the meeting. So with that, John, Laura, whoever has the floor, by all means, it is yours.
Is this superintendent's comment?
No,
This is-
superintendent's
comment
remarks
was
were
exactly
pretty
what
much
Ray
what I
said.
just said.
Thank you, Ray, and I would like you to introduce you, our principal, John Griffiths.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, board. Good evening, community and teachers. So excited to once again be able to come up before all of you and share the important work in which we are engaged. I'm so excited that this year I have colleagues joining me so that it's not just me up here alone. And I thank you guys, you teachers, for being here, for spending the time to help put this presentation together. Basically, just go through a little bit about what we can expect to accomplish this evening. What we're going to be doing is, first of all, reviewing the results of our 2017 tests, as Ray just mentioned, which will include our Regents, our New York State math test, our ELA standardized test results. We'll take a look at those and discuss those, putting them in context, both historical and in light of other metrics that we also employ to measure student progress. Then we'll take a look at literacy instructions and how we deliver it, and make sure that along the way we answer your questions. I would love it to feel conversational, so board members, while we're going through anything, if you have a question, please feel free to ask it while we're on the data set. It's probably easier than going back slides. There is, after the data analysis, a slide for general questions if we want to maybe break and have any questions from the community at that time, and then I will pass the baton over to the teachers who will talk a little bit about our literacy initiatives. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's get going. I got to time that this computer's time to go off way too quickly. Sorry about that.
Computer says you're done.
Thank you very much, board. If there are no further questions, wow, I really just went down.
Happens.
Sure does. All right. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that pumpkin at the
All right. Sorry about that.
No trouble about it, that's predictable.
Oh, you know what it's saying? The battery's low. Is this not plugged in?
Switched on.
So how's everybody doing?
Computer's rebooting.
All right.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. Okay, so let's just jump right into some data. So some of the easiest data to take a look at is actually the tests that are done by our 8th graders, because the way they're graded is so much what in the adult world we're used to, the old 100-point scale. So the first test we'll take a look at is a select group of kids. This year we had 9 kids take the living environment regents. Of those 9s, basically we can see this is that small cohort of 8th graders by grading band. You would see that there's nobody that achieved below an 80% on the living environment regents. And we could see that the majority of our test takers fell within the 85 to 95% range for that test. So, with 8th graders taking what many high school 10th graders take, that's a great accomplishment for us.
John?
Yes.
What's the percent, how many, 9 out of how many are taking the test? And 9 out of how many that qualified to take the test?
9 were put on the Regents track.
Okay.
That starts in for science in beginning of 7th grade. So it's a 2-year progress to get them ready for that Regents. So that was the size of that cohort that particular year, and it changes from year to year.
Gotcha.
It's actually a little bit larger in math. I think it was 11. 11. And we could see the banding is also, we have everybody scoring in the B and A range, skewed more largely towards the high 80s, but certainly a good representation in the 90s as well for our Regents. And we also administer a Spanish proficiency test. This is the FLAX, is the Foreign Language Association of coordinators and supervisors. So this is a consortium that got together when New York State stopped writing their own Spanish proficiency test of foreign language experts from across the state. They make their own test. They offer it to their services to districts around the state to provide a measure of Spanish proficiency for high school readiness. And as you can see, we have our entire 8th grade population that take that test, and they do extraordinarily well.
And how many was in that?
That was the entire population. So that was 14, 18, 19, 21 last year.
Do you know anything about, it's a written test, correct? Computer test? What is it?
It is written and oral. So there's an oral portion where they're listening and having to answer questions based upon oral comprehension, and there's a written portion as well. It's given in 2 different parts.
By computer, by human, or how's that work?
It is done. It's done orally. It's by the teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Then we get into the fun stuff. The New York State testing program is the standardized testing program that New York State offers. It's in mathematics. It's in English language arts. It's administered to every student from the grade 3 to grade 8. Unlike a Regents, where you're ending up in a percentage of 60, 70, 80. We are dealing with proficiency levels when we're talking about standardized tests. So students will score at one of 4 different levels. Level 1 and level 2 are falling below a standard. When a student hits level 3, they're considered proficient at meeting the state standards in that given subject area. And if they're a level 4, they're considered exceeding the standards. In many times we have looked at data in this district. We've looked at data by what percentage of our students are meeting a level 3 or 4. This evening we're going to be taking a alternate look at test scores through scale scores. So I just wanted to introduce the board and the community to what scale scores are. Scale scores are determined by the number of points a student earns on the test. So there is a certain amount of tests, usually in the low 400s, that are possible to earn. The purpose of using scale scores are to ensure the test results mean the same thing year after year. Because what can happen from year to year are as there are states established what are called cut scores. And cut scores they're established annually, and the cut score may affect the corresponding performance level. So in the case of a district such as ours, it is a better indicator of success to look at scale scores. It measures the entire population, not just who is achieving a level 3 or 4. And it's also a more meaningful look at our particular data because our student counts are very, very small. Percentages can sometimes, with a small data sample, be misleading. So we're going to primarily look at how our scale scores compare to that of our region and our state. Having said that, whether you look at percentages of students achieving level 3 or 4 or scale score, both measurements are highly correlated. So the first thing we'll take a look at is mathematics. In mathematics, basically, we are getting kids ready for that test through a program called Eureka Math. It is something that came out of the Engage New York math modules that were created alongside the Common Core standards to prepare students for the new standards. It is obviously then Common Core aligned, it's carefully sequenced. We are a school that really embraces this pedagogy. It's implemented with fidelity, and I think with that we're seeing great success in mathematics. As we start to take a look at the first data sample, we can start to see. So this is basically what the slides are going to start to look like. It doesn't look very exciting because this is the current 4th grade. So there's only one score sample, but you're going to see the slides get more interesting as we take a look at different cohorts. Basically, when we're looking at the New York State test, we're going to look at a longitudinal sample over the past 5 years, from 2012-13 to last year, 2016-17. That actually happens to also be that first year, 2012-2013, if we remember back, was the first year of Common Core testing. You're going to see that there will be 3 different colors as we look at the data, with blue representing our students, orange representing all of Putnam County, and gray representing New York State. As we're looking at our first data sample of last year's 3rd graders, this current 4th grade cohort, in terms of scale scores, we will see that we're above both the county and above the state by several scale score points. You also see right above the year the number of tested, because that does tend to fluctuate and is something that impacts data as we go forward in our discussions.
Yeah, so John, our mean cut score for 3rd grade last year was 317. The state mean was 308 and Putnam was, okay. What was this is only relevant when you know the range though. What was the high mark? So you can tell where you are relative to.
If we go back to, sorry?
I think you had it.
Right there. So there's the range. So the range is 180 to 412. That's
180 to 412.
That's actually the scale score range
Right.
for last year's ELA.
Right.
So that's the, and as you see as you go down,
No,
it does change
full range.
slightly. But it's usually from somewhere in the 100s to the low 400s is usually the range.
So,
John,
okay.
Here,
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
I'll explain. So she's wondering, okay, so can you go back to the mean cut? Okay, so here are the mean cuts, right? So this is grade 4. If you look at it, it starts at 1, my bad, up,
164
and it ends at 4.
286.
No, well, that's just level 1. The top score would be 416
Yeah,
if you're hitting all the shots from the outside.
okay.
Okay.
But we're looking at the numbers for grade 3.
Right.
Read the chart above, even though this is current fourth grade, that's this
This
year's
is
fourth grade,
third.
they were
Looking at third
tested last
grade.
year.
That's
My
correct.
bad.
Third grade, exactly right.
So that's why we're saying 180.
That's
The
what
range
it's-
is 180
to
180.
Gotcha, my bad.
180 to 412.
You got it.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was English,
You're right.
correct?
That's right.
So they're not.
That's right. This is math. They're very, very similar. The ranges are similar between ELA and math, but thank you for the correction.
Okay.
That was the chart for ELA. This is math.
Right.
I'm sorry, you don't have the cut score chart for math.
Oh,
But
now
they're-
that I get it figured out.
But they're very, very
The
similar.
reality is they all
They're
wind
very,
up
very
there.
similar.
Okay.
All right, they're-
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize.
And is 22 the year of 8th grade graduation for
Yes.
this cohort?
Yes, so that's the class of 22 in terms of their 8th grade graduation year. All right, so if we take a look at 5th grade, we're seeing that our mean scale score across our current 5th graders have stayed the same from when they took the test in 3rd grade to 4th grade with the mean scale score of 327. Putnam County happened to stay the same, albeit quite a few 12 points lower in their scale score, and you'll see that there was actually between the past 2 years, the 4th grade test statewide dipped significantly from when they took the class, taken the 3rd grade. We move on to 6th grade.
Hey, John, what's the range of the test and what percentile is 327?
Okay.
The New York, by definition, is 50th, right? I mean, the New York average, state average, by definition, is 50th percentile, right?
So, ask your question again.
First of all, what's the range of the scores? 0 to 400?
Same question as
zero-
same question as with the 3rd grade test.
Yeah. So it will run the same. They run slightly differently from
Grade
test
to
to
grade.
test and grade to grade, but in generally from the 100s to the low 400s.
Okay.
So what I could provide you is I could provide you the charts. It would have been a lot of charts to provide for every single test and every single grade. But if that's something that you'd be interested in, so you could look at that in context of the scoring ranges for every single test, is something I can provide to you.
And then I don't really need that, but what's just to, so we can gauge this, like if 304 is the New York State average, right?
Yes.
So by definition, that's the 50th percentile.
Yes.
Right.
It's
So
mean.
I mean, yeah.
Said differently, it's the mean,
Yeah.
right? So 327 is the
Is our mean.
60th percentile, the 90th percentile, like what's, I'm trying to get a sense of
Is it the,
the range, and like, I don't have a good sense from the number of 327 is substantially higher, a titch higher, it's,
So if the range goes from the 100s into the 400s, it's enough that we're looking at a difference in performance levels.
that's not my question. My question is, what percentile is it, as in is 327 in the top 5%, the top 10%, the top 20%? Relatively, where does it sit?
That's
Well,
I understand that it's
Grade 5.
63 points below,
Top of the-
below 400. both
John, the
sides.
scale scores you gave, the chart of scale scores you gave us. Yeah, all right.
I think one thing that's interesting is looking at, averaging the numbers, looking at the levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is, as parents, that's what we look at when we get the test scores come in. For the most part, the cutoff of proficiency between level 2 and level 3 is 320. And so our numbers are, so far from the 2 grades we've seen, are right bordering on that level into proficiency between
And
level 2
you're saying
and level 3.
3 is proficient and 4 is highly proficient.
Right.
Right.
If you don't know, John, it's fine. If we
No,
don't know the percentile.
we didn't look at we weren't looking at the data by percentile.
I'm gonna ask,
I'm gonna come right back to it then. I'll make a note to myself.
current sixth grade, we see a compelling data set. We see that in this case, we're seeing a negative trajectory over the past 3 years. However, where the mean scale scores for last year's test is grouped, although below the county, below the state, grouped within a point or two from the other two demographics. However, this is important to look at the nature of our school size. Because if you look at right above the years, you'll see that our number tested basically were reduced by 50% from 2014-15 to 2016-17.
14, 10, and 7.
The bottom numbers are the numbers that tested.
Number
right?
tested.
Yeah.
So in 14-15, there were 14 students that took the test.
Right.
When they were in third grade, 2 years ago when they were in fourth grade, 10 of them took it. And last year when they were in fifth grade, only 7 of them took it.
Gotcha.
So even though you're looking at the data going the wrong way for us over the years, it's hard to derive meaning because our number of students tested are decreased by 50% over the past 2 years. That doesn't mean that we don't take a look at the current sixth grade as individuals to ensure that they're not positioned for success. And we're going to discuss this type of a scenario within this evening when we're talking about why we look at data and what we do with data so that we are looking at individual learners and we're making sure that we're positioned to build their skills.
Do you have any idea why the dramatic numbers for New York State in this range? Why they spiked and then fell?
I don't. From year to year, they try to design the tests so that there will be consistency within the mean scale scores, but obviously with new test bank items every single year, even with all of the field testing they do to try to validate the questions, there is variability.
What's the statewide opt-out rate?
Do you know that?
No, 20%. I think it's 20%.
It was more than that last time.
We're more than that.
We're about
Oh, you mean the state?
Westchester
I'm sorry.
County.
We've been about 30%, high 20s to 30. Our current seventh grade, when they were in sixth grade last year, continued a great trend. Where from third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, their math scores were very, very successful. Same holds true for eighth grade. Took a dip last year when they were in 2 years ago when they were sixth graders. Rebounded nicely as seventh graders. And last year's eighth grade, our current high school freshmen, also showing very good success over county and state metrics for last year's test. I'll just stop there for a moment before we move on. Any questions?
I think I'll wait till the next slide is on.
What we see, can you go back to the eighth grade real quick? And we'll just keep an eye on that 2013, 2014. Right? So this eighth grade, okay, go back.
Go back to the ninth grade?
Go back to seventh grade. Can you go back to seventh grade now?
Go back another one?
Yeah. 7, 6. Okay, 6, 5. All right. The one thing that I see consistently in all these marks is that whatever's happening in fifth grade is leading to results. That's the thing. Look at the peaks in every single year. And it's in the growth between fourth grade and fifth grade is significant.
Is there anything in these numbers? I go back to Derek's question. It would really be great to know what the percentile is.
So a little additional data, which according to NICET, that roughly 40% in both ELA and math, it's 40.2 in one and 39.8 in the other. So about 40% across New York State scored proficient, meaning 3 or 4.
3 or 4, right?
So the 320 cutoff is kind of 60th percentile by that mark. I don't know how much above that 327 or 340 is, but
I mean, I'd just be curious to know what these numbers told you that either surprised you or that you just didn't expect or you didn't know.
That was basically my
What did you
Yes.
learn?
Sum it up for us, Jim.
Well, as I go through the classrooms in the school, during math time, as I observe math lessons, I see teachers who have a very comfort level with the curriculum. They've been implementing it now for 5 years. So I think there's a good familiarity. Along with that familiarity, I think there's a lot of faith as they've seen their kids come from younger grades. Teachers will tell me, and you guys, if you want to jump in, can speak up, that they feel that as kids are coming to them, they're coming to them with the math language, with the appropriate math skills, so that they're coming into their classrooms with a certain amount of mathematical readiness, so that they are where they're supposed to be for the most part, and they're able to then meet that particular grade level's curriculum through Eureka Math from where they're supposed to be. I think that, they like the curriculum. I think they like that it's a good mixture of teaching skills, of having pencil and paper work, but also really works with mathematical thinking, through gameplay, through mathematical manipulatives, through the idea that there's a lot of different ways to solve problems is sort of built into the program. So I think that so what I'm trying to say in the short run is I think we've got a good program. I think we've got good pedagogy. I think we've got teachers who are good math teachers, who believe in the program, and I think it's leading to good math learning. And as I look at this, I think that those beliefs are validated.
Okay, so when we made the shift to Eureka, which was years ago,
2012, I think we were.
right, 5 years ago,
Yeah.
let's say, there was a tremendous amount of support and professional development toward that, correct? If I remember correctly.
I wasn't here, the teacher's gonna, yeah, Julie's
A lot of
nodding yes.
workshops.
Yeah, we had a woman named Maggie who came, not as often as Worthy Advice comes,
Right.
but she was with us, yeah.
Okay.
We were given release time too.
Yeah, and there were a lot of, each new module, and there were a lot of those workshops, those was, heavy
And
on
I
that.
remember a lot of people going off campus for workshops and whatnot. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a way that professional development, the pedagogy, and the curriculum are working sort of in a synergistic way to have predictable outcomes. Is that a fair statement?
It's very fair. It's very fair. If you are going to invest in a new curriculum, alongside of that, it is very prudent to invest in the professional learning so that the teachers feel that they're familiar with not only the curriculum and its scope and sequence, but with the philosophical underlyings of the pedagogy, and that they have time to work with professionals to practice it, to get feedback, so that they know that when they're doing it with fidelity. Absolutely.
Fidelity. Good word.
So this is now a view of percentages of students that are at 3 and 4. So maybe this starts to get more in terms of the data set that Derek, you were looking for, because it is now working with percentages. To just describe it, we see on the x-axis level 3. This is last year's test, Garrison, New York at level 3. This is this year's test, Garrison versus New York State for level 3. And then it basically repeats it for a level 4. This is the percentages of Garrison students 2 years ago, I should have said, and New York State. And this was last year, Garrison to New York State, and that is then 3s and 4s combined. 2 years ago, Garrison to the state. Last year's test, Garrison to the state. So you'll see that we had last year as a school 63%. of our students that were at mastery, whereas statewide there was only 40% at mastery.
No, math proficiency.
Proficiency, thank you for the, yes, a proficiency. Proficiency being level 3 or 4.
The specific reason I corrected that, John, is I would say that if I look across all the data we've seen so far, and the ranges that you showed, it's kind of 320 to 340 is a 3 and 340 above. We're clearly above average for the state, but that's not a tremendously high bar, right? But we clearly got more kids who are proficient, 3 or 4, but our average kid is proficient, not highly proficient.
Correct.
Right? Our averages are kind of solidly in the
Our
3
mean-
zone.
Our mean is.
We have kids who are probably on both sides of the average, but, you know, our average is proficient, it is, i.e. a 3, not a 4 in general.
Right.
And another thing to take into consideration with the sample size of years for the test results, throughout those years, there's been a lot of times that the state has changed their cut scores.
Yes.
So what could have been a 3 was now a 2, or, you know, vice versa. So it's kind of hard to really gauge those numbers as being consistent along all those.
And if there's a community member out there who maybe had kids that were in this school 7, 8, 9 years ago,
Very good.
they might have been used to a time when the cut scores were such, whereas statewide they were 80%. And that's no longer the way the cut scores are devised. So, you know, it would be easy if you were to look at a data set from 10 years ago to say, oh my goodness, we used to have 95% at mastery, now we only have 63. What has happened? What has happened is the metrics the state are using has changed dramatically with cut scores.
Right.
But, and that's why we don't rely heavily on year-over-year comparisons, so we look at relative, not absolute performance, which is why the percentile ranking has become so important. You want to see how you do, as you did here, against the state, against other schools in Putnam, Northern Westchester, BOCES, or whatever other peer group you
Overall
decide.
ranking. or
Whatever other peer group you decide is relevant. Because we get it, the test changed, it's changed substantially from several years ago, and that's why, as I said, we don't rely on year over year to the extent we do relative performance.
And to the point about relative performance, the other notion here is that sometimes the test scores get, the cut scores might go up, but the tests themselves might be less demanding, maybe less rigorous, might be shorter. So the tests themselves change, and the test experience can change over time. Sometimes they get more intense, longer sits. Sometimes they get shorter. Depends upon. And so there's a lot of nuance within these numbers. But I guess one of the questions is what Ray goes back to. What are the take-homes for you? What are the take-homes for the teachers? What are they seeing in here that's useful towards pushing themselves into making significant impact for the students?
Well, to address your earlier point, we certainly have seen a lot of fluctuations in test taking experiences over the past 6, 7 years. Tremendous. The nice thing is it does seem that with our new commissioner, that she is basically, has offered us a glimmer of hope that there will be a lot more consistency from year to year with tests and being able to really make meaning longitudinally as they go forward. And basically then to reiterate meaning, I think, unless a teacher would like to volunteer something in addition to what I said, I think that this data is reinforcing what we feel about our mathematical teaching, is that we are in a good place. It provides us insight where there are learners. We're not, in the particular case of math, we're not looking at STAR data in this presentation. We will look at STAR data as it pertains to reading, but we do collect mathematical assessment data through Renaissance STAR. So it does give us insights as to the particular needs of individual learners. So I'm not here to say that there is 100% success for every single student with Eureka. We're saying that it is a great general education approach. We do have special education students that have different learning preferences and modalities. We have students who struggle at math who are general education students. And we have another measure through Renaissance Star to test their mathematical learning. Every single student 3 times a year, in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring, so that we can look at the data of individual students and really look at their mathematical deficiencies and remediate them appropriately through that lens as well.
So, John?
Okay, go for it.
I have to push back a little bit on we're in a good place. So 23 versus, based on the data here, so 23 versus 18% statewide of our kids this year were highly proficient, 21 versus 18 last year. The other thing, so slightly more. The thing I find most concerning, frankly, is 63% of our kids are proficient, meaning 37% of our kids, more than a third of our kids, are not proficient at a grade level in math. Why do we think that is? And I understand some number of kids in any class are not going to be proficient because of native capabilities and so forth, but you know, if you tell me over a third of our kids are not proficient at, you know, statewide levels, that doesn't say to me we're in a good place.
Well, you have to also take into consideration that the sample size that they're showing you here also includes, our special ed population. So a lot of our opt-outs are actually kids who aren't part of our special education population. So then now our scores are obviously going to take somewhat of a dip because we're taking the higher component out and
But isn't that true
keeping.
statewide as well?
I'm sorry?
Isn't that true statewide? I mean, we're not unique in that.
Oh, no, we're not unique, but because our numbers are smaller and our special ed population is higher, it's definitely going to make more of an impact in this type of
I
district.
didn't realize our special ed, on a percent basis, we have more special ed. kids
Yes,
than
if
others.
you compare it to the number of students in this school,
Yeah.
the ratio is definitely
Yeah, the
higher in
ratio
our
is-
district.
By the way, the small number of points critical, like, I think nothing of the oscillations year to year in classes of, 18 to 25 kids. One kid does badly or one kid opts out. I don't think the year to year, I'm just saying, I'm happy we're above average, but I don't go home like dancing from this. I actually find
And
it somewhat
neither do we, just so you know.
Yeah.
We know that there's always
Yeah.
room for improvement.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
we have the Eureka curriculum, but it's not like any teacher in this room goes and teaches directly to that
Right.
Eureka curriculum. We have a lot more involved, so we might use that foundation for our lesson, but
Yeah.
there's differentiation going on in the room where we're pulling groups and working with kids who we've assessed and realized that, they're having difficulty in certain areas. And so there's a whole big, long process that Eureka is just a tiny part of.
But we know that the numbers, the opt-out numbers, have been affecting our total numbers for a while now.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and that's, I think, is very important because that does skew the whole.
And it's good, and while we're just quickly on the topic of opt-out, is it this year where there's going to be a penalty for not having 90% of your population take the state test?
Say that again?
Are we getting
Are we,
final
are we
Well,
subject to a penalty?
The only thing I heard, and I don't know if it's fact or fiction, is that any student that opts, after the 95% compliance, any kid who's below, or any numbers that are below that 95, they may be considered a 1. And so that'll go into the data. So that's what but I don't know if that's fact or fiction, so I'll look into it. But that will hurt everybody.
But you have to
That will hurt everybody.
let the parents know once that, you figure out what the answer is, so that the parents are aware that.
Would you say that the range of the opt-out is based upon, your anecdotal information, that your typical opt-out is performing at the higher range, the middle range, or is it a smattering across the board?
It's a smattering across the board, and it could differ by cohort, which makes it even more difficult when we're looking at cohort data to understand what's going on.
So it could be statistically relevant, may not be statistically relevant?
That's correct.
It's a question. All right.
I find that I'm a little uncomfortable with the only frame that we're using to look at these numbers is to kind of evaluate, sort of like your report card. It's an evaluation of what kind of teaching there's going on. I'm not dismissing that there may be something to that. I get that, but I'm curious to know. This is a very crude measurement in the end of how effective our teaching is here, and I want to know from you guys. What are you coming away from these numbers with, or if anything? In other words, what have you learned about what's going on in your classes with your kids from these numbers? I'd rather hear that from you than just see these raw numbers.
I can speak for myself only.
Mhm.
I hold no stock in any of the state scores that the kids come into my, well, obviously in third grade they don't have it, but any of the state scores that they even achieve. Because we have seen, we know our students, and we could watch them walk in the room and probably tell you within the first week of school who would be a 4, 3, 2, or 1. And we have some of our students that we would expect to be a 4 that, depending on the situation, depending on the day, will end up with a 2. And it's for reasons that are completely unknown. We'll go back sometimes, we'll I probably shouldn't say it on camera, peek at like some of the work that they've done and see that they've made completely careless mistakes in maybe just computation, because it's a very high anxiety piece for a lot of kids. A lot of kids really invest a lot of themselves in that these tests are so important. We have so many other gauges that we use to assess our kids and see where they're at. It's ongoing. It really is a day-to-day thing of, like, you're giving your child, your class an assessment on something and you realize, oh, well, 3 people I didn't realize can't, they can't subtract across the zeros. Well, boom, I'm writing their name down because now that's a new assessment for me. So I'm going to pull that group, I'm going to work with that group, and now I'm going to give them a short assessment on that to make sure that they know how to do it. And in the meantime, someone else is popping up for one thing. So the state scores to us is nothing. We use our STAR results, which we do 3 times a year, and we do our own informal assessments that we're continuously doing with our students.
Well, that's a very powerful statement that you just made, and we should be clear. I mean, you're saying that these scores basically were engaged in some kind of silly charade here with looking at these scores, or is there anybody who has a different view there, who thinks that they actually are learning something important from these numbers, or do you all agree with Debbie?
I agree with that. I think part of it too is I can speak to the ELA because I don't teach math, but with the ELA part of it, it changes from year to year. One year there's a focus on cause and effect. The other year there's a focus on compare and contrast. Like, it changes. Also the length of it changes as well. So it's gotten shorter, but then the focus, is also something more specific than it was the year before. So it's hard as a teacher at that point in April or May, April for ELA, to say, okay, I know for a fact at this point my students know this, especially if they're focusing on something else that we don't teach until later. So that's also a common factor with the ELA, is that it often is a different focus each time the kids take it.
I think we're about to get into a little more on ELA, and I know at the end of your presentation, you're going to talk a little bit about this, how we use this STAR metrics as another indicator of progress, in addition to the data we're seeing in the state test scores. So why don't you wake it up again?
It just rebooted again. So while I'm waiting for this computer to reboot, I just want to go back to what David, what you were asking about the meanings of the test. I don't seem to be getting power with that. Does anybody
If I could just add one more thing while I'm trying to figure that out. Another interesting thing to note is, especially like on a third grade test, the average lexile level for the passages that they use are normally around between 600 to 800 lexile level. Very rare that we have a third grader come in at that lexile level, and it's very rare that we have students who will leave third grade at an 800 lexile level. So you have a child who's coming in below grade level to start with their reading, they're immediately at a disadvantage. So there's a lot more to these tests that people don't know.
But we've had the kids, coming into third grade is when they're being tested, but we've had them for kindergarten, first and second, so why do we think they're coming in as you described them?
Well, because the reading is different in the third grade, because they're going from normal grade level reading, kindergarten, first and second, and then we are also having them on grade level because that's where their instructional levels are, that's where we're teaching them, and then these passages that they're given are not on their instructional level. They are above their instructional level.
They're harder than they were.
So, our job is to bridge that gap and bring them from one instructional level to a new one, but it's still not to the point where the state tests are.
think another important point when we're looking at state test data to consider is that when the kids that are in this building, there's no skill and drill going on. What we're trying to do, whether it is mathematics or whether it's language arts, are giving them meaningful, engaging experiences. There are a lot of places, as a matter of fact, some people say to do well. There are a lot of stories about test prep, about some high pressure tactics to get kids to perform well on tests. Because when it comes down to it, test taking day is a stressful day. If we wanted to be in a place where the learning experience was to prepare them for test taking, we would be a very different school. We're trying to get them to be critical thinkers, problem solvers, collaborative. Those are things that are perhaps not so indicative in taking a test. So when test taking comes, we want them to be prepared, we want them to know how to bubble sheets, but they are bubble sheets. There is a booklet, and it says, do not turn the page until the teacher tells you to. And there is a sheet with all of those circles that they're not used to seeing to any great degree, because that's not the way we test on an ongoing basis. So I want to reemphasize that these state tests are a snapshot, that they are 1 day or 2 days in a child's life that is a very, very different kind of assessment experience and learning experience than anything else that they do while they're a Garrison student. And I want it that way. I don't want them to be bubble fillers. So I share the feeling of my colleagues that this is a snapshot. I think there's a lot of other measures that we do look for that are more meaningful measures than the state tests, but I understand the nature of the state testing system and the fact that it is important that we administer them and that we do our best on them.
Well, it's a snapshot that the entire state is taking, too, right?
That's correct.
This kind of performance might be not a very deep window into an individual child's soul, but that is not what they're designed to do. They're designed to capture the experience, a broad brush experience of how students are performing academically in relationship to everybody else, correct? It's not meant to be a diagnostic tool. It's not a diagnostic tool. It's an assessment of district performance.
It's still a snapshot.
It's a snapshot of not of individual students necessarily. We're impacted by our small numbers. We're impacted by opt-outs, but we could be impacted upwards by opt-outs. We could be impacted downwards by opt-outs, but that's everyone's experience. So there is, I'd say that if I wanted to know how my child is learning, I ask the teacher. If I want to know how a district is doing, I look at this.
Fair point.
Because it's not meant to be a diagnostic tool for teachers necessarily. It could be, but it's not designed to do that. Whereas the STAR stuff is more designed for a diagnostic situation for individual students.
Now, let me suggest that before the computer goes to sleep again,
Please
cover this.
Very gladly. I'd be very gladly to move quickly.
No, that's half facetious, but you've got a lot more to cover here. So.
Okay, so English language arts, the way that I just quickly introduced English language arts by talking about the Eureka curriculum. This is actually a slide that shows a little bit of a cornerstone about our new curriculum, but just as we move forward, the new curriculum that we're implementing is actually brand new. We've been implementing a curriculum called Journeys since around the same time of 2012. A lot of the data just happens to really reflect the implementation of that curriculum, which is something that we're actually no longer implementing. But being that as it may, we will take a look at the data in a very similar way as we were. When we're looking at English language arts, just to provide a quick overview, what you're seeing in those 3 circles is basically 5 years worth of tests, where every year we are giving 6 tests in every given year. So in the last 5 years, if you count up all those grades, we've given 30 ELAs. As basically a broad overview, 19 out of those 30 tests we have scored in the 90th percentile or above. In 2 of those tests that you're looking at, of those 30 tests, twice we scored below the 50th percentile. One of those was last year's 3rd grade, and that's a year that, as we can talk about, because it's certainly a grade that we're looking at supporting. The other time we fell below the 50th percentile was in 2015, our 3rd grade. They scored only 22nd percentile statewide. Last year, in 5th grade actually, they're 6th graders now, they improved to 73rd percentile. So we see that we had one class that was doing poorly, and now as 3rd grade, and then as 6th graders, they're positioned to do a lot better than they're starting off with. So that's just a quick little overview about the past 5 years, and then what we could do is sort of dive into the same view that we had before, where we're looking at the mean scale scores compared to Putnam and compared to New York State. We see with our current 4th grade, last year in 3rd grade, they fell a point, mean scale score a point below our county average, a little bit above the state. But this is not the start we want for our kids, and we're taking a good look at them and where they are and how they're going now that they're in 4th grade.
Do the scale scores remain the same, math and ELA, the numbers we got at the beginning?
Now for ELA, you have the chart. So
Oh,
now
that's the
that's the ELA chart.
That's the
for
ELA
master's
chart,
test. So
right.
now,
Got it.
if you want to go back, that's actually the proper chart.
Okay.
Our current 5th grade. We see a downward trajectory across the board in all demographics from 2 years ago to last year. Here's an interesting thing. If you remember back to this cohort in 5th grade, it's the opposite. They were taking a plunge in math, and actually they were doing a nice rise. The current 6th grade in ELA. But once again, we talked about the downward slide of math, and it's hard to make meaning because of the number of students tested. It's hard to celebrate this because we're not quite sure with this either. When you're going from a number, a class size of 14 3 years ago to 7 last year, it's hard to know exactly what you're celebrating. Our current 7th grade as 6th grade, they continued a very solid performance. Our current 8th grade, last year, our 7th grade, did phenomenally well. As a matter of fact, this is actually a point to truly celebrate. When you look at that mean scale score of 330, according to the state, our current 8th graders were, out of 685 districts in New York State, we were ranked at number 19, which puts us at the 98th percentile for that test.
Can you go back to that last class? So we went from 21 students taking the class to the test to 13 students taking the test, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Not to put too fine a point on it. The numbers go down, the number of participants goes down substantially year over year, but the score goes up, which tends to mitigate against the argument that our top performers tend to be the ones who opt out. At least that's not the case.
Not in that cohort.
Right.
And there is really, as I look at the students, as I look at the opt-out list, there is no trend in terms of whether it is the higher or lower achieving students that are opting out.
Actually, if someone's sick and
They make up.
They can make up. for
There's a
it.
makeup. There's a makeup period.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yep. And then lastly, our 9th graders, when they're in 8th grade, achieving their mean scale score of 315, well above the county and the state. And if you take a look at that in terms of the same percentages in ELA that are at mastery, or proficiency, excuse me.
we're the same year over year then, when it comes to 16, 17, 53, I'm sorry, I'm 55 and 53, effectively the same level of proficiencies, 3s and 4s, year over year, okay?
So when we see a number like, John, when we see a number like 15% scoring a 4, how many students do you think that is?
With the middle one, I think it's 40 mil.
Well,
Low teens.
I said this is a
12,
whole, this
13.
is a district-wide number, okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking middle school. Total population,
Yeah.
40, 14, maybe that's low 20s, 20 kids.
20
Low
kids
20s,
scored a
I'd say.
4.
But then again, I don't know if I was at proficiency in math. I was-
It's 14.
Okay.
Yeah, 14. 14 to 16%.
I was
So
asking,
out of the 3 through 8, 14 students hitting a 4. Right. Previous year,
We're getting 14 students from,
from the data NICET,
do we know how many students total were
so
tested?
we had about 100 test takers?
yeah, it's quick math here, 71 plus 19 is 90.
I'll go with your 14.
This,
So would you like us to do better?
hell yeah.
Okay.
At 4?
And you know what, and I agree.
More the merrier.
I would like us to do better as well, which we can get to in a moment. You know, when Derek, when you were talking about the numbers of 3s and 4s and doing the opposite and saying how many people weren't for math, we're looking at even more drastic numbers here, which I think is something to take a look at honestly and say, can we do better? And I say I'd like to do better. Are we doing better than the state? Substantially better than the state. But once again, we don't have literacy as a district priority just out of the blue. It's not on a whim. It's because our teachers identified it as a priority, which is the reason they're here. So we will very shortly be transitioning into basically a look at what we're doing, because what we're doing right now is implementing a brand new curriculum that I truly believe will be very, very impactful, so that over the years, as we're looking at these kinds of numbers, we should be seeing a dramatic difference, because we're starting a new journey when it comes to literacy instruction. So that's just a little quick preview. Before we get there, I was asked to provide just a quick look at our ELA proficiency by gender. So let me come up to the board so I can just sort of point to what's going on here. Basically, as we're looking at each of the columns, as you go in grade 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this is an all. I'll just take a moment looking at the all. So this is these are all, M is for male, obviously, F is for female. So when we're looking at the blue bar, we're looking at 2 years ago's test. When we're looking at the orange bar, we're looking at last year's test. So when we're looking at overall as a school, 2 years ago, our percentage of males at proficiency were 48% as compared to 65%. When we were looking at last year's test, our males 45% proficiency compared to girls, the females at 64%. This is then the state breakdown. Last year it was 34% boys at proficiency across the state compared to 46% of our girls at proficiency. Curiously enough, even though there is a larger skew between males and females at the local levels compared to the state level, I find it nice and reassuring that our boy number is almost as high as the girl number statewide. So that's something to consider as you're looking at that.
This kind of, to me, I mean, it looks kind of really like a meaningful negative figure. I mean, the difference between men, boys and girls. That is, I think I heard that this was not the case at Haldane. Haldane has a sort of more gender equality. Is that true?
Well, it was true in last year's test. If you go back and look at their data, before last year, I was able on the state site to go back and look at 2 years ago and 3 years ago, where there was an 11 or 12 point disparity, which is about what we're looking at overall at the state.
Percentage point,
Percentage.
not cut score.
Not cut score.
Percentage.
Percentages at 3 and 4. So there was 11 and 12. I think it was 11 when we were looking at 15, 16, and 12 when we were looking at 14, 15. We did reach out to Haldane and said, is there anything that you're doing that did lead to some results? And quite frankly, the things that Diane Bowers mentioned were things like making sure that there was a good, strong intervention program through RTI. They're using Fontes and Pinnell as their remediation tool.
Whatever it is all fine, but it's one data point.
That's correct.
One data point tells you nothing. Got to look at what the trend is, all right? And as I understand the data from Haldane, they probably did better than we did with respect to boys' performance versus
Yes.
girls. Girls still performed better than boys at Haldane by a number of percentage points.
Yes.
If I'm not, tell me if this is wrong. The differential in performance, when you look at our performance, boys versus girls, compared with the state performance, boys versus girls, we do better than. One of the questions I had for John in anticipation of this meeting, I'd still be interested in finding out, is not necessarily where Haldane is at any one particular point in time, but whether or not there are any districts in the state where boys do better than girls over any sustained period of time. Because that's the place you would go to look for answers to explain this discrepancy.
You mean in ELA?
In the LA, yeah, in this test, right?
But they do just fine in math. for the
Right,
most
well,
part.
exactly, so.
Girls are still outperforming.
Well, historically, boys are more reluctant readers than girls are.
Clearly.
And if you look at the variety of books that are available to kids in this age range, the amount of categories that cater to girls is probably 3 to 1 compared to the books that cater to boys. So if you have a boy that buys into a fantasy genre, then he probably has a lot at his fingertips. However, if you have a boy that is not into fantasy, that drastically limits the amount of books that will interest that child. So it's a direct correlation. If you are a good reader, you are going to score better than someone who doesn't read as much.
I guess, John, the proposition I'm trying to seek some confirmation on is that while we have a discrepancy, we do not have a problem necessarily. And in as much as we can all stipulate that we'd like to see it better, we'd like to see that gap closed, but we're not differentiated by the gap in any meaningful way.
I think we are.
Well,
Well,
I'm just-
John, you can answer that.
Well, I'm asking, that's a proposition of.
Okay.
I have 3 sons. I like to see them, reading as well as any girls in their class. And I want to make sure that as a father, I do certain things that I equally feel bound to do as a principal. Some of those things are making sure that boys and girls have access to high interest books, to make sure that they are accessible to them, and make sure that they are at their reading levels. One of the things that I'm very, very happy to see in the Common Core that I think addresses this is the stress on informational text, because one of the things we do see is that boys are more prone to want to read nonfiction. And one of the things that is highly correlative to the Common Core curriculum is that we're supposed to be reading about 2 to 1 informational text over fiction. And I think that that's something that as we are implementing a curriculum that is, truly where it's supposed to be in terms of the 21st century, I think we're going to be addressing it. One of the things that, anecdotally, Ray, I hear your point about Haldane and one data point, but one of the things that they are very, very proud of is having a intervention system in Fontes and Pinnell that is designed to support any reader when they're hitting their frustration level in the early ages. It just so happens what they're using and finding success with after a few years is what we're piloting, or that Julie Green is going to be talking about, is what she's piloting right now. So we just invested in a very, very cutting edge way to remediate struggling readers, which oftentimes are boys, when they are in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, so that we are catching a lot of those students, and perhaps we'll see a difference in scores as the years progress now.
As the father of two daughters, I, of course, am secretly thrilled to see these numbers. But to answer to Ray's question, are there districts that consistently?
That would be a research question. That's, Laura and I could see if you could find an answer to that. It would be interesting.
No, I think, that, look, you have a data specialist that you have access to. The database is, the New York State database is there. It's a simple matter of putting together the right, framing the question properly to examine the database and just see.
And once again, as we're looking at gender, we also have to remember our cohort size. We have to remember that there's an incredible disparity between, when you're looking at a small cohort, you're looking at, sixth grade, there were not even enough, Princeton tutors, there were not even enough kids taking the test to do a gender analysis. There are times when we have 2 girls in a class and 10 boys in a class. I mean, there are some wonky demographics where we're looking at gender as we're going through these grades. So that's just another thing to keep in mind as well. It's hard to make meaning from this sometimes in a small school. And that's just what we're dealing with.
Fair enough.
All right. So my last piece before I turn it over is to take a look at some local data. And I'm going to go through this quickly because really the point of this is to basically provide you with one other look at reading data, which is from another source, which rather than gives you a broad overview of a cohort, represents individual learners. When we're looking at data sets, there are many, many different ways that we have. Whereas we were talking about STAR being something, James, you were talking about New York State data being something to analyze a district performance. STAR is something where we could do that. We could take a look at a district performance, or we could look at a class's performance. We could look at it based upon national percentile ranking. We could look at it based upon the average reading level of a cohort. We could look at it their mastery of state standards. But more importantly, we administer this so that we could take a look at the needs of individual learners, see what they need in terms of state standards, see what they need in terms of specific skills that they're ready for in terms of their progression of learning. So what we're looking at here is just, and we're not going to spend a lot of time, but I want to basically show you, because each one of these lines, if you're a parent, is one of your kids. So when we're looking at 6 kids here, when we look at the number 6, that's 6 kids. And we're looking at basically national percentile ranking by quartile, and who is in the bottom quartile, who's in the second, third, and who's in the top quartile. All right? So we're able to, I'm showing you this because there are now, last year there were 6 kids, this year there's 5 kids. 1 kid, this is a summary of all tests given last year. This one, the red is based upon 1 test. We only have 1 measure, our fall measure. But we see that from last year to this year, that represents 1 kid. 1 kid that's not in the bottom quartile anymore. 1 kid that's now moved up into this quartile. So as we're looking at this, it might not seem profound, but it allows us to say, wow, we have kids in the bottom quartile. Is that going to translate to ELA scores? Darn tootin' it's going to translate to ELA scores. But more important, those are your kids. And we want to know who they are, and we want to know what they need so that we can do something about it. Because that's the assessment that really is going to make a difference to these teachers and to us. Because this is representing living, breathing children in the building where we could take a look and we could say, all right, what is it in 3rd grade? Look at that. We've made some good movement in 3rd grade. Look at that, from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. And it's funny, I don't know if you remember, 2nd grade, I showed data during the board, during the special ed presentation saying, I'm really concerned about the 2nd grade. Well, you know what? Something good is happening from second to third grade, where we're seeing from the red test is this year, the blue was last year, we're seeing some good positive movement to the right into the higher
So
quartiles.
just so we're clear, Doug, and I asked Laura, what you're looking at when we said cohort analysis, the blue line with your assessments that were done of these kids when they were first graders.
In this case,
in the
second
blue
grade,
line.
because we're looking at the third grade chart now.
Okay, well, okay, fine.
So,
Anyway,
yes.
you're talking about a cohort. You're looking at
Yes.
the same kids year over year.
That's right.
Got it.
Blue is last year, red is the fall measure this year.
Of the current third grade.
Third grade, so the blue was when they're in second grade,
Right, got it.
and the red now is them this year.
And that's a fall score.
Fall score. And the blue is a summary of all of their scores from
From
last year.
last year. So,
So this is
so
this
this is
is
what you want, yeah.
this is what we want to see. Are there still 4 kids in the bottom quartile in third grade? Yeah. Are some of them receiving really great special education services and special class reading? Yeah. Are the ones that not in special class now have a way for us to intervene with a special interventionist, Julie Green, who you'll hear from? Yeah. So this is what we want. So, and we have this for every grade, and this is so cursory because if I wanted to find out about any of these kids, those 4 kids in 4th grade, I have another test where I could look at their names, I could see who they are, what their reading level is, what their deficiencies are, what 5th graders need, what skills that they need, and it will give me a breakdown. They need to identify, author's purpose. They need to, and it will give me all the things that these people need to learn. 6th grade, every single grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. We have data for every single kid in this school, knowing where they are and what they need to go to the next step to be better readers. And that's all I have.
Well done, John.
Thank you very much.
Not an easy presentation. Not an easy presentation. Seriously, well done. And we've been interrupting you throughout. James, I'm sorry, you have a question too.
Yeah, I would like to probably disagree with Ray just a bit in the judgment about whether we have I think framing it as a question of we have a discrepancy but we don't have a problem is a bit, it's not useful in my book. Because I think this country's got a problem with how it educates males around literacy. And this country has a major problem with it. And the state has a major problem with it. And it would be shocking if one district in New York State amazingly did not have a problem with how it educated males.
That's kind of what I asked.
Yeah, so it's an epidemic of literacy. And I see it at the college level in admits. I see it in the college level at SAT scores. There's a reason my college wants to maintain a high SAT score, and it's a reason that the discrepancy between the number of American males we admit versus American females keeps getting bigger. And that's about how we deal with literacy.
Well, I'll talk to you honestly for a second, because I told you I've got 3 boys.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you what it looks like for me and why I think they're not as good as readers they could be. My boys want to go outside where my daughters are staying inside and we're all out to read. And as a father, maybe I'm not doing as much as I should be to ensure that there are books in their hand while they're home. We know I try to keep the Xbox at bay.
I've been meaning to tell you about that.
But I'll tell you something.
Not so much what you put in their hands as what you take out.
Well, that is it. So, if I'm a principal who is a busy working man who goes home to try to do my best as a family, maybe I could do better in terms of making sure that my boys have the same reading time that my girls seem naturally prone to want. So if I could make a recommendation to the community in which I serve, it might be to share that experience and take a look at what's happening within individual households to make sure that we're all sharing that type of responsibility.
I would suggest so I can't change America, and I can't change all of the males in America, though I wish I could. But I like to think that as a board member, as a member of this community, that we could do something strategically and tactically to address literacy in the community, male and female. But when I see a 19 percentage point difference between the girls in ELA scores and the boys in ELA scores, I'm thinking the boys need some focus. And the question is not just recommending that people pick up a book or put down a computer. The question is what are our strategic and tactical measures that are within your capacity or within Laura's capacity or the board's capacity or the teacher's capacity or the student's capacity or the staff's capacity to do something that will ensure that the boys within this little bubble, this community, are able to move beyond the culture that is larger. That's what I'm hoping that we can do, because I can't change the bigger picture, smaller picture. And I think, I think when we look around the communities around us and we see boys, and it's a question of what are we doing to enhance literacy, what are we doing to insist upon literacy, and what strategies? Because we know that literacy begins at home. We know that from when they sit on their laps to when they start toddling to when they pick up their first, iPad. We know where this direction is going, and the question is, what are we going to do to deal with this? Because for me to feel like, well, I do not want to be resigned to a fate that undoes people. I'd like to be resigned to some hope, to a strategy for hope that uplifts people. I don't want to just accept that girls read and boys do not, because I think that's untrue. How do we get all these Supreme Court justices? How do we get all these lawyers? Where did all these boys come from? Yeah. No. I'm not saying they would have won in a sprint. I'm not saying they would have won in a sprint. I'm just saying they can be kind of confident at times.
So in terms of celebrating and promoting literacy as a district, we cannot do enough. I will say that there are some promising signs. As a way to celebrate literacy, we have a genre of the month club every month where there is another featured genre, and I'm very, very happy when there are those celebrations at the end of each month that boys are represented fairly evenly alongside girls. That when we have a Deer Week celebration and there's a readathon, that there's a good representation of boys there alongside girls. But most importantly, our literacy teaching practices are changing in real time right now. From a place where there was a lot of different well-intentioned practices, but the teachers will say for themselves that there was not a lot of consistency in approach, to now a coherent curriculum that will start in kindergarten and progress sequentially through the entire 9 years that they're in this school. And it is, not to steal any thunder from what's coming up, a curriculum that is based upon students working instructionally within books that are geared to their own interest and ability levels so that we can build for the success. And
That's a perfect
which is the
setup right
segue into a fine introduction of four of our talented teachers, Debbie Earl, Jen Kirkpatrick,
John makes
Julie
it easy.
Green, and Marjorie Giuliano.
We're going to
Debbie-
provide you hope right now.
That's it. Debbie, just so we all know, is our one of two third grade teachers. Jen is our fourth grade for both sections in social studies and in reading. Julie Green is so happy to be our new reading interventionist, working with those struggling kids I was talking about, and our new second grade teacher. What a great addition to our faculty, Marjorie Giuliano. And I give you the pros.
And when we say hope, right here, we don't want to pin all of our hopes on Mrs. Green. However, when we go back to historically looking at our numbers and where our ELA scores were the lowest, at one point we did compare our scores, and where we saw the most growth out of our kids is when there was an early interventionist. And we did not have that for quite a few years. So we're hoping now that we are back to having an early interventionist that we're going to see progress from all of our kids. So just to start with that, so you're our hope. John also had mentioned about that there wasn't a very cohesive program in place, and that is 100% correct. We, back in, I think, was it 2010? We had
2010 is when we initiated
Journeys. And Journeys, we at the time, we had about 4 vendors come in, and they did a whole, you know, everyone did their spiel to get us to try and buy their things. And we ended up adopting the Journeys because
We didn't have anything.
we had nothing, and we got to a point where we just had to choose something. So we went with the majority of what people wanted. However, not a lot of teachers really bought into the Journeys program. There also was not a lot of professional development that went with the Journeys program. So there were some teachers that were doing it, there were some teachers that weren't. Some people liked it, some people didn't. So we really didn't have a program that everyone on the staff had bought into. Now, when Teachers College came up, we were between 2 programs there again, and we researched them in depth. And Teachers College definitely came out on top as being one of the most rigorous reading programs with the best results. It's very, there's a lot of data that goes with this. They've been, it's about 20 years that they've had this program in place. And it's something that we felt as a staff, all of us, was something that we could buy into and that we wanted to implement for our students.
In tying with that, we also adopted foundations a few years ago, and that was another type of a scenario where it was like hit or miss throughout the years, depending on, you know, what was going on outside as far as community goals and what our plans were. So now we're doing foundations definitely with Fidelity at the kindergarten, first and second grade level, and that's, I'd say, probably only for the past 2 years that's been going on consistently.
And to add to that, you know, you're well aware, I'm not sure the public's well aware, but our grade levels switch a lot. So you have a teacher who's been trained in 2nd grade foundations, and all of a sudden next year they're doing 3rd grade. So to actually change a grade and have to learn a whole new curriculum for that, just for the next year to end up going back to 2nd or maybe going up to 5th. So, you know, there is a lot to be said if you're in one place for a length of time, that you learn what works, what doesn't work. But in our case, we're kind of, you know, unfortunately, we're forced to be going back and forth, so we're not developing that consistency here. However, with this new program, which we'll start the slideshow, with the new program, it's consistency from kindergarten through 8th grade. The language is the same, the program's the same. Everything builds on the previous year. So even though this is our first year, we anticipate, but we feel confident that we're going to see a good rise in our numbers. And that's the reason why we chose this program, because don't think that when those scores come out as parents and you're looking at those scores that we're not looking at them too, because we do. When they come out in the news, we're the ones clicking on there going, oh my gosh, how did the kids do? We weren't happy with our test scores. So this is why we really chose this program for you and for us to help your child, all the children, become better readers.
So I'll just start kind of with the background about balanced literacy and what that actually looks like in the workshop model. So one of the things with our training and our PD is just what does the workshop model even look like? That's kind of where we started with words of advice. We're very fortunate to have words of advice. I come from a TC background where it's straight TC. So to have someone like Melanie and Holly, who's been coming into our tiny little school and working with us on a regular basis, has been really nice because they know our population, they know our students. I feel like they know them really well at this point. So it's been nice to have Melanie and Holly come in and kind of guide our instruction towards a lot of these learners. So the idea of the workshop model is really that we learn by doing. It's really an I do, we do, you do type model. So they have explicit instruction in the beginning always, then they're going off and they're really doing it, guided groups, small groups, and then they're doing it on their own completely independently. So one of the things I'll talk about on the next slide is really the importance of being independent. Because a lot of the workshop time is 40 minutes at a time we're talking. So when you talk about boy, girl, who do you think sits there longer with that stamina to be able to write piece after piece? And there's your answer. So a lot of that has to do, honestly, with having the stamina and building that in. Now, granted, we're going to have the same language across all grade levels.
So starting that at a younger grade and teaching them how to sit there and what that looks like is so important, and they're doing it in kindergarten. And John can attest to that, doing an observation in kindergarten. He even said these kids are writing. Granted, they're interactive writing and scripting, but that's the beauty of the program, is they're starting it at such a young age. So that's kind of the idea behind the principles. They're given an authentic purpose. I included that up there. So it's really teaching kids, whether it's reading or writing, how to use different texts, how to read into them, how to note the author's craft. We're using words like that in 3rd and 4th grade, and I'm sure they're using it in primary too. And really looking at what those texts actually look like, and how can you do that, and what elements can you include into your writing to make it look like that. So that's a lot of what this is about in terms of the workshop model. And this is really just a breakdown of it. You'll see this again when we get to the reading slide, but this is kind of like what it looks like. So I put there little notes to kind of help you with that, but basically what it is the mini lesson. It's short, it's quick, it really should not be any more than 10 minutes. It's an explicit teaching tool, basically is what it is. It's no student talking. It might be a quick turn and talk kind of situation, but it's really, that's a minute or two of that. And then you're back and you're sending them off for that independent work time. So that's that time where it breaks off into those two boxes, and that's really you're conferring, that's where you're meeting with students, you're doing that one-on-one, you're doing that in small groups, and then you're also working in strategy groups. So in writing, it might be working on a specific skill that you find when you walk around the room, students need specific help in. Or in reading, it might be working on a specific skill or strategy you feel that you can target a small group with. So it's really nice to see that going on within the classroom, because you get a chance to kind of work with small groups and one-on-one and really confer with them and figure out where they are as a writer at that point in time. The end is always a share time, so that could be, that's you as the teacher reiterating your mini lesson. Sometimes you have them repeat it, and that's the goal behind it, is you want them being able to identify what it is that they've worked on today. And the most important piece that I find is, and where are you going to go with that in the future? Where are you going to use that in other classes? I always say, you're going to do this in Mrs. Waters' class. I always try and refer to science and social studies and across the board, so that they know this is not just writing right now, right here. You are spreading this across different subjects, really, throughout the day.
And I'm not sure if we touch on this on one of the other slides, but the way that we figure out our strategy groups and conferring is they have an on-demand assessment in the beginning of the unit and at the end. So at the beginning of the unit, they do this on-demand assessment. We take them and we evaluate them, and we look and see who's doing what, who's not doing what, and from that, we're able to form our groups. So that's the direct instruction that we'll be providing to those students, so it's completely differentiated on who, scaffolding who's where.
And the last part of that is the word work always, which is very important, is being able to work on phonics instruction, word analysis, breaking apart words, because that's a big part of this component as well, is being able to spell and break down words. So whereas we're focusing on suffixes this week, next week we'll be focusing on a different skill or strategy with word attack. Okay, so it's happening also, and I know it happens a lot in primary, a lot, and then it filters up through the intermediate grades so that we also embed that within their writing. So that's really important. If there's any questions, just stop me. Okay, this gives you an idea of writing workshop in a 1st grade classroom versus a 4th grade classroom, which is currently what I'm teaching this year. So you can see from Unit 1 to Unit 4, you start out with narrative, okay, that's the same in 4th grade. Unit 2 in 1st grade, you're writing non-fiction chapter books, whereas in 4th grade, you're doing boxes and bullets, you're writing essays. So you get into the essay writing process, personal and persuasive essays. So it's interesting because TC has it pretty much set up so that it goes across the board, narrative, information, opinion. In 4th grade, it's a little different. It's opinion, information, and then you're back to writing essays again and analyzing different texts and writing literary essays. Skills that you see, in college, in high school and college, but you're kind of preparing them. But the big thing about that is they're reading different types of text, short stories, poems, the genres vary. Another thing that you might note on the 4th grade side, and I'm speaking to that just because I know it really well, is the idea that it's very reliant upon nonfiction. So kind of like what Mr. Griffiths was mentioning before. So a lot of those skills, when you're talking about state tests and you're talking about and really anything, life skills, a lot of that is embedded into these units. So it's a high reliance on nonfiction writing, writing claims with supporting evidence, all of those kinds of things that they need as real life skills. And I treat them like I say it, I say, we do this, you have to do this for a job, you have to do this for college, so you're really doing life skills when you're learning this right now. And they kind of look at you like, but it's, it's all about the language and how you phrase it to them, but it starts to make sense. And then, as Mrs. Earl was saying, there's a pre and post assessment with each unit. It's both in writing and reading. So one of the things that you do is you always have an on-demand writing piece at the beginning of the unit. When you start talking about assessment, so these are those other things in addition to like the STAR and the state test. These are those formative assessments that you can do and you can really use to evaluate where your students are at that particular moment in time. So for example, this is what a teacher would typically say before he or she gives a pre-assessment in a narrative unit. Okay, so it's basically a moment where, they're giving you all that they've got at that point in time before the unit begins. So it's really great because that's how you can differentiate your instruction, right? You can use those writing pieces and really decide the specific skills that each student in small groups need to really work on, and need to focus on within the classroom. So that's where a lot of your differentiation takes place from the very beginning of the unit. This is a picture of my 4th grade classroom, so you see students working. This is one of my favorite things to do I do it with every unit, but this was specifically with narrative. So being able to analyze student samples. We analyze mentor samples as well in writing. I'm actually looking at picture books and good writing and what that looks like. But these are actual student samples. So the students have to actually go in, read the work, and identify whether it's grades 3, 4, or 5. And I give them that range, being 4th graders. So and obviously that's after the whole entire process on the left. That's them doing the work on the right. So they have what's called a progressions chart, which I'll show you on the next slide. But basically, we all have this. It ranges from grades K to 6. And you can kind of see the different language that you need to use, where you need to be when you're in 4th grade right now, where you're expected, and then where you need to go in order to hit that 5th grade mark. So they actually visually, when they look at that, it's kind of empowering because they can see what they need to do to be able to upgrade their writing, and where they're at now. So they were actually looking at different samples. They had no idea which grade they fell under. And the Post-its are all about specific things that they've noted within that student's writing using the progressions chart.
What do you do with a 4th grader who sees in the 5th grade model their own writing, who's already there?
So then you talk about, okay, what can we do now? Look at the progressions chart. What's the 6th grade?
So you got this picture at least theoretically, would go out to 6th grade, 7th grade, or
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
and TC is huge on goal setting
Yeah.
in both reading and writing, where the kids are very self-aware and they make their own goals. So obviously that person's goal would be different than someone who, is just starting out. So they all keep track of themselves and their learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and they know. They start to see the difference between the grade levels, and they know what they want, where they want to be. So it's really helpful for them to see it laid out like this. Sometimes they're even more critical than they should be. Very interesting. So that's that you can't, not that you can see that at all, but I'll tell you what.
But really the visual
We're not
is
gonna go
all
through this
you
line
have
by
to
line,
see.
But you get the idea. So it talks about the overall, it talks about the leads, it talks about transition words. So you can see pre-K on the left.
Right, so the grades go from left to right,
Right.
the columns.
Right. So they're using that chart to really see. And basically the biggest thing that I point out is look at the words all the way to the left and look all the way to the right. What is the difference? So what's the upgrade there? What do you need to do in order to be at a 4th grade level right now? And some of them will be honest, they'll say, I didn't even know I had to do that in 3rd grade. So it's interesting to hear their honest approach to this as well, Aside from that, it's also teaching them how to assess their own writing. And that's also a huge component, is that they need to be able to assess where they're at right now. So that's a huge part of it also. It's not just me telling them, they can see it and they can assess themselves as well. And that's me. You.
So here's an example of writing in the 2nd grade. So if this right here is a narrative writing checklist. So this is like what you saw over there, the progression, but this is more friendly for the child that has the drawing. So what I give this to my students in the beginning of the unit. and I go over it with them, and I talk to them, like, these are the expectations. If you want to get a 4, this is what I'm looking for when I'm going over your writing. So they've already had a chance to look at it, they work with it throughout the entire unit, and then they keep revisiting, and they're looking. Here's an example of the lead. I thought about how to write a good beginning. And then they look and they look back on their own writing, they go, not yet, starting to, or yes. But I take it a step further, because I'm not just gonna let you check your own work, you have a partner, you have a peer editor that's working with you. Their responsibility to also look at that checklist, check your work. That is one of the ways that you can get to publishing. You need to be able to get through there to do that. Of course, students are working in different levels, so if you look at the checklist, the second grader, I usually block out where it says second grader, so students who are working on different levels, they may be getting a different checklist, and I know the level of their checklist, they don't necessarily know it, but they're still able to look at it, and then check their work, and then check their partner's work. If you look at the picture above, that's a picture of 2 of my students doing peer editing with the narrative checklist, and this student was really pressing his partner, because I told him, I said, that's your job. You need to press your partner, because you don't just want to get a 4, you want your partner to get a 4. We all want to get 4s in our writing our narratives. And then below that, in my class we have a publishing bell. So when we're getting towards the end where it's almost the publishing party, when kids start publishing, they start ringing the bell, and then everyone stops everything and then yells, "Congratulations, Stella!" So that's like a big thing from them. Everyone wants to ring the bell, so they're really about getting published. So that's one of the things that you see in TC. It's really awesome.
All right, so that brings us into the reading workshop components. And if you notice, the slide here is almost identical to the one for writing, because TC reading and writing is structured the exact same way. So for reading workshop, same thing, a 7 to 10 minute mini lesson first thing for reading workshop. Now, this was a huge adjustment for us because we love to talk and we want them to talk back to us, and we want this big whole in-depth thing, and then it takes 20 minutes and then all of a sudden you only have 30 minutes to read. So what Melanie has worked with us on is really limiting it to 7 to 10 minutes. As much as you want to really hear what the kids have to say, when you confer with them, that's where you're going to hear their thoughts on what you're doing. So 7 to 10 minutes, we have our mini lesson. As soon as we finish that, we say, readers, it's time for you to go use some of these strategies that we just taught you in your reading, and we send them off. So during that independent reading time, we're pulling groups. We're pulling groups that are guided reading groups, depending on their level, and then we're also pulling strategy-based groups. And we were able to make the goals of the strategy groups based on our Fondas and Pinnell results. So in Fondas and Pinnell, they'll go through and tell you the sections that the kids maybe weren't as strong in, and that's the section that we're going to be working on them in a strategy-based group with. Then, so it says guided reading there, so that we will work on it on a single text with that person, but they're reading at their own rate. So they might be in a group together, but I might be sitting next to one person, they'll be reading the book to me, and we'll be conversing and talking and inferring and things like that, and then I will go to the next person and we'll be doing the same thing. So it completely depends on the child. But what I love about the reading workshop is during that independent reading time, they're reading their own books. So we have 40 minutes every day where they are sitting with a book that they have chosen. And I think that's where we're going to see the improvement and we see the hope. Because in a traditional based reading program, the students read the books that you gave them to read. Now it's choice. It's their choice of what they want to read. So they have their book pouch. They go ahead of time into our classroom libraries, which we were so fortunate to get this year. And they have to have, 3 or 4 books in their pouches at all times. So that way there's no reason for anyone to be up and moving around the room. We graph ourselves in the beginning of the year of how long we can exhibit stamina for reading. So, maybe the first couple of days of school they can only sit still for 6 minutes. So we grab 6 minutes, and the next day they're like, well, we can do 10, and so they're making a goal that they can make it to 10. If you walk into my classroom, which John and Laura, I think, have both done it at some point for reading, every student in that class for 40 full minutes will sit in their groups reading. And boys and girls both, because they're reading what they want to read. So that's huge. And then we have the share part where if we have reading partners, so sometimes the partners will get together and talk about what they've read, and at the end they might share what they've talked about or how they've used a skill that we taught them in their own reading with their reading partner. So it's pretty much, like I said, the same structure as the writing. So in the mini lesson, there are a lot of different skills that we're teaching them to do. So this is just 2 examples of things that we have taught them so far in the 3rd grade. So on the left, we have good readers stop, and then they think, and then they jot about what they're reading. So an example of that would be they're reading a book. They have their Post-its with them. They always have Post-its in their book pouches. They see something that they're confused about. They put a question mark on the Post-it. They stick it in the book. It's not time to stop and write a big, long, detailed thing. It's just something to jog their memory. Later on, they will use their reading notebooks, and they will go and take those Post-its and transfer it into an explanation or a question in their reader's notebook. So they'll say, okay, here I had a question mark. Oh, that's right, I had a question about, the character and why they did that. In, the story that I'm reading, I was wondering why so-and-so did that. It was confusing to me because I thought he was happy, but it looked like he was sad. So they're really doing a quick snapshot while they're reading and then carrying over into their notebooks. So we give them these posters. We create them. We talk about them all the time. We hang them in the room. They know that this is a place they can go and look anytime they have questions about something that they need to be doing in their reader's notebook. Another thing, just an example of something from a mini lesson was good readers think about their reading. So we're teaching them that reading is not just the words. There's so much more to the reading. We had a lesson where the kids had to think of a huh question, they called it H-U-H, a huh question. So something that made them wonder, and when something makes you wonder in a book, you have to go back into the book and really look at the information the book has given you to help you figure out why something may have happened the way that it did. So it's really teaching the kids it's not a surface read, it's an in-depth, go back in and study what we've done. And we use mentor text. 3rd grade mentor text this year was Stone Fox, and all the lessons focused around Stone Fox. So that was our mentor text, and we would be able to go back into Stone Fox and show them exactly what we were talking about, and they would be able to all, because this is a read aloud, understand the strategy that we were using based on the read aloud book. And the mentor texts are phenomenal, and we definitely had some tears at the end of Stone Fox. Reading workshop, 4th grade. Is this me or you?
Either one.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're 4th.
Okay, sure. So these are the units for 4th grade. So like I said, if you think back to the writing units, they kind of go hand in hand. So the narrative writing goes along well with interpreting characters, the heart of the story. So they're writing those narrative stories. They're thinking about the importance of the characters. They're thinking about how to create a story arc, beginning, middle, end. So they're really thinking about character motivation, character struggles, etc. That's also a heavily addressed item, which is also on state tests as well, as character traits, character motivation, getting evidence from the text, etc. Unit 2 is what we're on right now. So you see again, nonfiction, historical fiction clubs. So those are book clubs, which they love. I actually start them earlier because I think it's a skill that it's worth doing. I usually start it in January. It's worth starting before then because it's something that by 4th grade, I think they enjoy. I think it's engaging, and I think there are ways to build in those skills earlier with different genres. So that's the idea behind the reading unit. And again, the importance, the stress of TC is the heavy reliance that on the reading and the writing together. They're going hand in hand. They are writing about what they're reading. So that's the very important part of these units.
So the great thing about TC is that it really helps you. Oh, I know, and I didn't even know you were here. Look at that. That's amazing.
We do that.
So, the great thing about TC that I really use and love about it is that here with the reading progression, we have children they're reading on different levels and different ranges. This is a tool that I use as a teacher to help me when it comes to creating my small groups and differentiating. Because it's like my cheat sheet. So I look at it and I'm like, okay, this is where the student is. These are the goals that the student needs to have to move to the next level. Now I can use that information to come up with my strategy groups or my small groups. So if you look at the bottom picture, that's a small group post-it. So what I do is I have a bigger post-it for my kids, and then I make mini post-its for my small group, and then I do the quick mini lesson during the workshop while I'm doing my guided reading group, and they're doing their independent. And then I give them that post-it after I taught them that skill. I give them that post-it to go back to their tables with. That is theirs, and they just love the colorful post-it. If you look up there, the picture of Jameson, this is an example of a second grader sharing his book with the class, and I projected it on the document camera, and that's just another example of celebrating reading. And he was so excited to share his book. It was a Lego book, and he's actually also reading novels as well. So it's like celebrating all types of reading, no matter what. And the children were so engaged, and they had opportunity to ask him questions about his book.
Assessing readers ties into everything we've just seen. It's another data source for us. This year, we started to use the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system, which is similar to the DRA, which we were using some years ago. And we kind of strayed away from that. We had to do AimsWeb, and then we moved into other computer-based assessments. So this is our first year that we are starting to use that assessment system. So this system gives us a good overview of the student and where they're at in a variety of areas in reading. So engagement, how much do they enjoy books? How often are they reading books? What are their interests in books? Decoding, how do you break apart words? Fluency, rate, accuracy, what is our speed of reading? And then overall comprehension, which you'll see down in a few more slides. This is an area where we found some of the students need support. So we're hoping that Teachers College and implementing this new reading program will build up that comprehension level. Mainly, not so much literal, tell us what happened in the book. They could do that pretty easily. It's thinking beyond the book, thinking about how the author crafted the book, thinking about why the illustrator did pictures a certain way. And then in keeping with that, there's always a writing about reading component that's tied into the assessment.
And there's a K-8.
K8.
assessment.
I have to tell you, it took a good portion of the whole month of September for all the teachers to do this. I would do a few as the intervention teacher, but it's really important for the teachers to have a good read and a good feel of their own students. So the teachers were doing this with their students. Each student would take up to 45 minutes at least.
And the time should decrease because we now have a level to start with, but we didn't have any levels to
So
start
we were starting students at levels we weren't sure whether they were, here or here, and then, which could tie into when you see the results, why they're kind of, all over the place. Students were sitting for a long period of time. They were, getting tired after some time of reading and retelling over and over.
And the one thing that we found pretty much across the board with the F&P results were our children are really good decoders.
Yeah.
So we had kids who really felt, and parents felt like their child was on a certain level, but when we hit that comprehension piece where they had to infer and they had to extend, they had to make connections, that's where we were lacking. So if a child may have been on a P reading level, with the Fountas and Pinnell piece, it's going to backtrack them quite a few levels because of that comprehension piece.
And these are all skills one get, not to interrupt, but these are the mid-range skills that are about the skills around talking about what
Talking
you
about,
read.
Yes.
Which is what you get in conversation with families, what you get when you share books,
Exactly.
in small groups. It's what
Right.
you get. Those skills start very early, and also,
They do.
need to be extended out.
So it's not just to give us, well, this is what the student's level is. It helps teachers in a variety of ways. It helps us figure out what type of a guided reading group they should be in. It helps us plan some strategy sessions that we, when we see that certain students are having difficulty with how characters change, that would be a group that teachers would pull. And we can also use it if we're doing it in September. K1 and 2 is doing it in November, and all the other grades will be doing it again in January and at the end of the year. So we will be keeping track of our data and seeing how those students progress through the year. So this is an overview of what teachers see. Students don't see this. This will give us an idea of where the students fall. So our main goal is for them to be either in the green or in the yellow. Green is they can read that book all on their own without anybody assisting them. Instructional would be a book that we would read with them. It would be maybe like one level above their independent level, and that would be a book that we would do in guided reading groups, small groups, tailored to that student's specific needs. And then obviously the red is their hard frustration level. Those are books that they might pick up, they might be able to read, they might be able to decode, they might have a challenging time applying some of those comprehension questions and answers.
Right, because you can see that they could have a 98 to 100% accuracy, but if they don't score at least a 4 on the comprehension piece, it's considered a frustrational level for them.
You can't move that, so. Teachers are focused mainly on that instructional level. So students at an instructional level of an F, that teacher's pulling all students that are at that F level and just moving them up ever so slightly. What I'm doing this year is we're fortunate to be able to implement the Fontes and Pinnell Level Literacy Intervention System, LLI, which John mentioned earlier. That is a system that is tailored to students that are falling below grade level, probably like 2 or 3 levels below grade level. It's a systematic approach. They are reading books at their instructional level, and it's supposed to rapidly move them up a few levels. And that's done through word work. They do a new book every day they see me, and a lot of book talk. A good portion of the lesson is talking and discussing books, which I'm noticing. It's getting a little better, but at first it's like, they would just look at you with a blank face. They have nothing to say about what they read. So it is getting increasingly better with what they're getting in the classroom, and then when they come into my room as well. And then these are just some of the goals that teachers and I establish with students when we're working with them across fiction books and informational texts. There's 2 different components there too. So, when we're looking at a fiction book, we're thinking about the plot, the setting, as opposed to an informational text. What's the main idea? Characters in fiction books. What are the key details in nonfiction books? What are the text features? So they're learning all of these words. We use this language with them. So when we say text features to them, they know, well, oh, that's a graph, that's a chart, that's a map. They have all of that information.
And what's nice with that is currently in the 3rd grade, we're doing informative writing for our 2nd unit. So it's our reading unit and it is also our writing unit. So when they're dissecting books and they're looking at graphs and things like that, those are now things that they know when they do their writing are important for them to be in their nonfiction needs. So they're looking at those text features and saying, okay, well, I might want to put a definition box here. I might want to put a diagram here. So it's a really nice complement to each other to have the reading and the writing both be concentrating on the same thing at the same time.
All right. So this is data that Debbie and Jen put together of their classes.
Which hopefully it links.
Yeah. Okay. So this kind of shows you,
That's okay, that happened.
there's
We have to rely on this now, because I don't
Oh,
think-
it's not on yours?
It's-
Oh,
I
because
think
it's,
we can sign in.
late.
so that's
Okay,
okay.
okay.
So these are all the readers across both third grade classes, right?
Yes.
So this shows you where all the students fell. As you can see, there was many below level, far below and below level. So we're noticing what do those students need, how can we move them up. Those students, some are IEP students, so they're getting special ed services. Students that have RTI next to them come singing out. So in the past, that wasn't happening. They were getting just extra support within the class. So now they're getting almost like a double dose of instruction throughout the week.
And the goals that are on the right-hand side are taken directly from Fontes and Pinel when we read with them and ask them the comprehension questions. We see where they were the weakest, and that's obviously the strategy that we're going to try and strengthen.
You could see inferencing is across the board is
Yeah.
a big skill set.
So can I reemphasize that? So I'm looking at the education, they'd be, at this time last year, they would be receiving no support, and they would be taking the ELA in a position of being far below, and we were not positioned to offer them any extra help before this school year, having Julie Green as an interventionist.
Right,
That's
and just to clarify,
profound.
there's 4 IEP kids, so those kids who are receiving that program
Yep.
were receiving
Yes.
services ahead of time, but the rest of them that just say RTI
We
have not.
have no way of, so all those data sets, when we were looking at ELA, all that time, we had no way of intervening and helping kids that did not have IEPs to get better, because this is not just now, this has probably been for many years. There are these kids that are in 3rd grade and in the red and struggling, and there was no way to support them.
This assessment, this is the
Fontes and Pinel.
FMP for the beginning of the current
Beginning of
school
the
year.
current-
Yes,
So we're going to do a similar assessment
Yeah.
mid-year and a
That's
third
right.
assessment at the end, and you'll look to see who's moved where.
And this is our first data point
Right.
too, so we don't really know what our, this is our
What you can
starting
expect to see
point.
movement, but it's the first, it's very thorough.
I,
There's also a data chart that we could do. I know Melanie from Teach,
There we go.
from Words of Advice showed us, kind of showing a summer slide, how they were in June
Oh,
at
right,
the end of the
yeah.
year.
What
and
kind
how
of
they are.
I can
regression?
see it there, but not here.
I mean, on the other hand, for all those far belows and those belows, you do have students that are on or above, so we're also tailoring instruction to those students as well.
Okay.
So the red ones are still the ones that need the work, so the
Yes.
11 at the top and the 4 at the bottom.
Yeah, so this is the 4th grade. So when they go into 4th grade, they should be reading at like an OP level, P level, okay? So if they're not at that P level, then they're below level. So, if they're at an L, they're significantly below. If they're reading above D, then they're higher. It goes all the way up to D, all the way through 8th grade. Scroll down to 8th. Yeah. There's a lot of 4th graders.
How do you-
32. So there's the 4th grade class.
Okay, good, yeah.
It's only 7 that are in the red though.
Yes.
Yes.
And
I
if you
guess-
notice, the first 2 are IEPs.
Mhm.
Three, first 3.
And so then I'm seeing these students here. Up here?
So how do you benchmark this, though? I mean, so,
This is-
well, no, but you've still got to, you're going to do another assessment in January, you'll do one in May.
Right.
If you follow all of if you implement the program as it's designed to be implemented with Fidelity, et cetera, what kind of movement would you expect to see in a particular class? So if you said, well, we moved 3 of the reds to yellows, 3 yellows to amber or to green, and so we made progress. And that looks good. But how do you know it's the best? What do you compare it with?
Well, I do have like a progress monitoring chart that shows you where, like at 3rd grade, what in June, where they should be at compared to May. So that's a key component, I think,
Right.
that shows you if they've shown any growth in that area.
Yeah, you'll see it on the individual assessments. You'll
Right,
know
right.
you'll be able to move kids. But does F and P say across all the schools and all the students that
Mm-hmm.
we provide this program to, we would expect that if you faithfully implement it, you would be able to see
Right,
this much
certain
movement
level,
over a
right.
period of this period of time.
Yeah.
Do they do
That
that?
is the benchmark, that's the benchmark chart she's talking about.
Okay,
It
that's-
shows you.
Right.
Technically,
The
four letters by the end of the school year. So like fourth graders should be S, or end of, I think it's maybe even R, but. it's
Okay, but there is some,
There is
some
yeah.
metric.
It's more
Yeah.
by its own grade level.
And then we also have the STAR tool, which has a national sample, where you could take that kid and look at their growth trajectory according to a growth line of what would be the national average for
Right,
growth.
so you're looking, right, okay.
So we have
Most
different
grade
ways
levels
of.
are three, like.
Three
levels.
letter mo.
Yeah, except
movement
for,
levels.
first grade.
Younger
They're
grades, yeah,
younger grades,
seventh
but,
graders move.
yeah.
Yeah, got it, okay.
And honestly, the STAR results, we do progress monitoring probably every 2 or 3 weeks. And the way we do it is we progress monitor everyone.
Mm.
Even if they aren't technically on our RTI list, we want to see how the kids are all doing on a whole.
Right.
So that STAR will break it down and show us how many points they went up on the lexile level, how many questions they're getting right. They actually tell you the skills that they struggled with on the test. So we will sit down and look at those and see who's making progress and who isn't. And I can't say enough about this reading program. So out of my 17 kids, the first progress monitoring that we did, we had 16 kids show progress. And that's amazing
Mhm.
for
Sure.
third grade and for 16 out of 17. So we are seeing the results of good reading.
But also with TC, the great thing about it is that because you're constantly working with your children, I've had students that it's not necessarily the time to reassess them,
Mm.
and I already see, oh no, this student, this is too easy, you've grown, let me do a running
Do a
record
different list.
and see, and then move you up.
And what I also did, you know, an informal type of a graph to just see, you know, because it's, first year we've been doing this intervention, like pull-out type program. So the question is like, what students are we pulling? How are we deciding which students we're pulling? So I kind of wanted to see how the S&P results compared to the STAR results.
Mm.
And they were pretty much
They
in
correlate.
line. Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, even across tier 3 and tier 2, they fell in the same area.
And I think the great thing is that we're all excited about the program. We love the program.
That's evident.
Our enthusiasm, I feel, carries over to the kids. They are loving what we're doing. We do celebrations at the end of every unit. They're excited, they want to read, and I can't tell you, probably every single time that I stop them for reading, I get, no, because they want to keep going. That, to me, right there, says volumes.
Laura, John, how many hours a week do we, instructional hours a week, or presence in the building do we have our students? How many hours in a given week? No, in a week, a Monday through Friday, normal week, how many hours of instruction? I'm trying to get to how much of this,
Of overall instruction?
yes, we have
Or
them,
literacy instruction?
no, overall,
25,
25 hours a week.
yes.
That includes gym and
Yes.
music and art and lunch and everything.
Recess.
And research, yes. How much of the reading and the writing and everything we've just seen of those 25 hours are devoted to what we've just seen?
Reading and writing.
Reading and writing.
Well, I'm departmentalized, so I teach that.
Got it. So at 25 hours, you're doing somewhere 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, but this is an additional half an hour.
No, I get it. That's why I said.
Give you that extra half
All
hour.
right. Thank you. That's okay. That's-
So the last part of the slideshow, in the third grade, we had a reading celebration last week.
Great.
And we finished, it was building a reader's life. And so they were learning, you'll hear the word curmudgeon in there, that you need to treat books like gold and not like curmudgeons. They practiced speaking like curmudgeons and reading like curmudgeons, and then they practiced reading like gold. It really just set a nice tone for them to know the difference between really loving to read and just having to read.
You need a role model.
And, yeah. So you'll see here, what we asked them to do for the reading celebration, Mrs. Couture and I asked them on an index card to write down something that they've grown as a reader, and then something that they've taken from our mini lessons that they hadn't done before that they're doing now. And we picked a few out and we videotaped videotape them, so it's for you to see coming straight from your children what they have learned. And there was zero coaching in this, just so you know. We were really, really pleased with everything that they've taken away from this program so far.
By trying to understand all of the words so we can figure out what is happening. And envisioning more. Envisioning means to make a mental movie as you read. Some things we have learned in Readers with Trust so far that limited to us and helped us as readers and to stop and jot and not fly past difficult words and phrases.
Do comprehension checks and make connections to text we are reading.
To try out different sounds and words.
Not to read like a curmudgeon, instead read books like they're gold. Ask ourselves hard questions and look back in the book to find clues. And to break up words into smaller words to figure out what the big words mean.
And that was just a sample of the things that they've taken away from what we've seen on here.
Bravo.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for sending us a curmudgeon home. We'd send an angel next time.
So let's see. So you have what you need as far as RTI support. Yes.
The RTI support, yes. I am seeing, I say 35 students, so to the degree of fidelity that things, I'm not seeing students every single day. I'm seeing students maybe 2 times a week. The students that are identified as maybe needing a little extra support, I'm seeing more than those 2 times. So, but yeah.
We have the curriculum we want.
We have the curriculum
We have the
we want.
professional development we want.
Yes, we do.
We have new teachers, we have literacy specialists. So how do we move the bar? How do we make the change? How do we meet the priority that district determined as a priority? Is it, what do you need?
Very good. That's
Yeah. I mean, obviously this is our first year, so we're not going to see, a huge jump in 1 year. So the time and patience to see the program actually be implemented. However, yes, we have Julie for RTI, but if you were to give us a Christmas wish list, we probably would ask for more support in the early years. You know what? It is a proven fact that early intervention is crucial in helping districts succeed in all areas. So to have, one person who is servicing 35 kids, it's getting the job done, but if you really wanted the job done well, you'd have to invest a little deeper.
And then we have, do you feel like there could be an expanded role for professional development, the words of advice? Are they here enough? Are they getting to all the grades, or do you feel like it's mainly focused on that K through 5 experience?
No, they've come across all the grade levels. And we're happy with the amount that we're getting right now. That's the most professional development that we've ever received.
Our business manager isn't here today, so.
She's watching.
But, now's the time, and I would say the same thing to John. Now's the time to say, okay, the district has determined this priority. It is silly to determine a priority. Give the school a mission and not give them the proper funding or support or development or tools that they need to complete that mission. I'm all about completing the mission. That's what gives me hope, is when I see that you have what you need to complete the mission. And you have what you need, and we have what we need, and parents have what they need to do this, because it's not going to happen in isolation.
And children.
Exactly. That's the important
I'm a
thing.
little confused. Is ELA instruction for the middle school also transformed in some?
The ELA instruction for the middle school is
way.
also utilizing, Chris, 6th grade is using TC, 7th and 8th grade is using TC in conjunction with the traditional novel studies. So they are doing components of the Teachers College.
It's been fantastic.
But the thread is still pulled all the way through,
Most definitely.
right into middle school.
Do you feel like
Because
that?
that's what we've been trying for a while.
Right, that the curriculum, the scaffold, I mean, I know it's set in the design, but my question is, do you have what you need to ensure execution of fidelity through the grades?
I just have to say, I've been into a lot of the classrooms, I'm sorry. But on the selfish side, because I go into all of the classrooms, because that's sort of our position, that's what we do. We go into classrooms to support teachers and talk to kids and see what they're learning and what they need. And I have seen the thread. The thread has begun. I've seen publishing parties throughout grades, snap words throughout the grades, speedy book reviews, but they're speaking of the same language, the language of reading and writing. Not just the teachers, but the kids. Why are you reading so much? Because I want to be a really strong reader. And I want to be a great writer. So you can feel it. I mean, the whole building, I feel, is fostering the love of reading, fostering the love of writing. I think there is an excitement in the air, a celebration in the air, and I think we're really gaining some momentum in this work.
And I think the kids really know that we value it as so important, and they do as well. I mean, it was great when the kindergarten did their reading celebration. They did a parade around the school. Every class came out and lined the hallways and cheered them on as they went by for being good readers. So they're really realizing that through us that this is something that is really important to us. So therefore, it really should be important to you.
It's important for the board to hear that part of the deal is that teachers in college and just know that these programs, which require a lot of work from the teachers and the administrative end to deliver, are the kinds of differentiating tools one needs to reach males and females, to reach high achieving performers as well as those struggling. But I think that I think it's really important that we understand that it's when we approve purchases and professional development and we tenure and we create positions, that the hope is that we're having this impact on delivering the kinds of things necessary to reach people.
And to follow up on James's point, what would you like to have that you don't have to execute this?
Probably more early intervention.
Right now, I'm pushing across K-5, but I am trying to steer a lot of my attention towards the kindergarten and first grade, mainly because, those are heavy numbers.
So you need another person, another professional to be doing this?
Yes. Yes. When we've looked back on our numbers from previous years, our numbers were the highest when we had reading teachers, when we had early intervention, people working, special ed teachers that were pushing down into the K2 areas. And that's when we saw our numbers go. Once those positions, were eliminated in a sense, or absorbed somewhere else, that's when we started to see our numbers drop.
So John and Laura, do you think that, do you concur with that view that we need more early intervention?
You can always use more early.
Well, I know, but I mean,
Yeah, well,
I'm asking,
with the
should
numbers,
this be a budget priority? is what I'm
with the
asking.
numbers that we have, I think it makes sense to add more personnel. With the hope of all of this front loading of intervention, the hope is that we don't have these numbers, that there are not so many referrals to special ed. But by if we invest in that early stage of learning, there's going to be definite benefits.
Right? My word, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Don. I have a
Sorry,
little bit of a cold, excuse me.
Ballpark, or if anyone knows off the top of their head, how many kids do we have in the school in full-fledged special ed and then in RTI, if I have the terms right?
Well, I know K-5 is about 35 students. I don't know.
Special ed?
That's just RTI.
That's
Just
our
RTI.
RTI
30,
students.
sorry, K through 5?
K-5.
I don't know, Megan and Mary, if
Those
you...
are students that fell below benchmark on STAR, on the F&P assessment, and on New York State test.
30, so 4 or 5.
And in years past, the question that always came up to the teachers, why do we still have kids that are 2s that have not risen to 3s? And our answer has been the same every year since then. It's because we don't have the support in the early grades.
That's where the acceleration occurs. you accelerate quicker in the lower grades. than you
Most
do.
definitely.
Because
And it carries through.
when you hit fourth grade, you transition from learning to read to reading to learn. And that transition, if you don't have the whole package there, fourth, fifth grade, it's very difficult. There's a way to college to catch up. I think, I can't remember what I was going to say.
It'll come back. So well done.
I'm sure there's something else.
It'll come to you.
Okay, so I mean, I do talk a lot, but this is something I deeply care about. This is not about. This is not about like. There's nothing more important to me than this. I mean, in relationship to academics, in relationship to education, nothing's more important than this. And getting this right, and I don't want to wait. My fear is this: if we sit too long and we wait to see the next round of assessments or next round of tests before we make a decision or a realization that we don't have what we need to complete the mission, then I feel like we made it. We're hedging. Hopefully, when we when we look at these assessments and we see the color changes in the F&P read, and we see some changes there, we say, well, we don't need that budgetary investment. But my concern is if we wait a whole another year, then we've lost that. And that's my concern. Because if we're going to wait a year to measure, then we got to wait a year to hire to a certain extent. Right? So let's see what happens next year. I'm a little concerned about that.
You've been here long enough to know
Yes.
that come the second week of January, we begin a process exhaustively to figure out what we can deliver, what we take in, and what our priorities are going to be in terms of our staffing and every other expense we're going to have. And I am fully confident that the passion that you expressed here tonight with respect to this particular set of needs will be a part of our conversation going forward. So
I know it's been a long night with this presentation, but this has been, as far as I know, the meatiest presentation on data and literacy, pedagogy, and curricula that we've explored. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And we appreciate your
No
support.
argument.
We
No,
really
seriously,
do.
this really is some of the most substantive discussion of what goes on in this building outside of this group. And so it's very much appreciated.
And I think where it really started was from the board saying, why don't you just ask the folks who are doing the work and what they need? And this is really, it comes from you, and it's really impacting our kids. And I want to say, James, festina lente, which means make haste slowly. So we want to go fast.
I don't know how to do that.
But we want to push that process. So festina lente.
There are no other questions from the board. We did say, to those of you who've stuck with us through all of this, if there were questions or comments, by all means, now's the time to raise them. Sure. Yeah, you might as well. So that way they can see you at home.
Just a quick question. Are they geared towards us, or can we sit and listen, or is this?
You needn't stand. No, well, ask them.
No, I'm sorry, this wasn't necessarily about the question. Or, this is comment.
Okay.
Thank you. So I am Lisa Rassick. I am a parent.
You guys can sit down.
Yeah, sure, by all
Yes.
means. Still has a long time, been on here for a long time.
Thank you. You can answer from here, don't worry.
Okay, so I'm Lisa Rassick. I'm the president of the Garrison Children's Education Fund. I'm also a parent of a second grader and a fourth grader.
I'm Sarah Turney. I'm the VP of Grants for the Garrison Children's Education Fund. And I'm also the parent of a second grader and a first grader.
So first of all, we wanted to remind everyone that we are in the third week of our month-long fall annual appeal. So this is where we do ask for gifts, we ask for donations to support.
There we go.
That's great. We'll take them in any form at gsep.net, by check, cash, is certainly welcome. But in any case, this along with the spring fall helps us to fund really exciting grants, such as, so gratifying to hear, in partnership with the school, in fact, the Teachers College Reading and Writing Program that we've been hearing so much about tonight. So it's so gratifying to hear that the teachers are excited about this. I know that my children at home are excited about it. In addition, we just approved funding for the Garrison Arts Center. So for grades K through 8, there will be 2-day workshops that complement curriculum work that's already happening in the classroom. So these aren't one-off sort of art projects, they actually are enhancing the work that children are already doing and wanting to do in the classroom. We also approved the Constitution Marsh Eagles program again, and then Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival performance, among other programs that we've done throughout the year. So those are just some highlights. That's how the money goes to work. So it's really important that we do continue to get the gifts and the support. Thank you.
I just want to add, for the Classroom Libraries program, which was a really large grant for GSEP that we funded over the summer, a lot of that was driven by a presentation that Ms. Green did to you guys last year, and the passion she had for that. And as a parent, to see that translating, my first grader gets those new books home in her bag. You can tell they're new. She's excited by them. They are higher interest. They are more engaging. She's really picking up in her reading, excited by the challenge of them. So you can see these things in action of what GSEP does, what the school is doing, and what the teachers are all doing together when we come together as a community to really focus on the reading. So thank you for your support for that program, and thank you to the teachers.
Thank you,
Thank
GSEP.
you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not,
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
It's for the teachers and for Laura and John. When was it that early intervention teachers were moved out of that role, or you lost them? And is there a cohort of older children who didn't have that, but who are still in the school?
So we happen to have Mary Karp here. So I'm going to let Mary talk. She will be presenting, but she's here in the audience, and she was the last reading specialist who you were hired as a reading specialist, and as I understand, you were then moved to special education. And could you tell them when was that?
It was a group of students, I think that they're the ones that are in, hopefully in 5th grade now, that had more special ed needs coming in. And I think it was Megan and Debbie, or no, that split the grade, and Megan came into the kindergarten that year. So I had been working kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade support, like reading support, but then when that switch happened, there were kids that were coming in. Prior to that, not so many students were coming in so young that were classified. You would see them struggle after they maybe started to learn to read, but these were students that were coming in that really needed support right away.
In kindergarten?
In kindergarten.
So it would be 5 years ago then.
Yeah.
So it's been 5 years. So basically, as we were looking at that longitudinal data, that entire time, while we were looking at the past 5 years, we've been doing it without an intervention.
And the other thing that happened was a decision that was made was that because class sizes were smaller, that maybe that teachers didn't need support. And it's not a true statement. I mean, so the teachers that I was supporting, I was told, well, they only have a class of 12 or 14, or and that it wasn't really an accurate. I didn't believe that it was a good decision to make, because you need direct instruction in small groups with specific skills to build those in a teacher who has, even if it's just 12 kids, they're all at different levels, they're all doing different things. You need devoted time to address these skills, to build them up.
What was the ideal LLI class size?
Right now, I see, the ideal is supposed to be
Three.
three, but I take like 5.
Yeah. So ideally, for an intervention, you should have direct instruction for, was a 40-minute lesson?
Like 30 to 40 minute lesson, 5 days a week for 3 groups.
3 students to 1 teacher, ideally.
with fidelity. Also, I have to say aid support was pulled away too, and now there is more aid support at the early grade levels. That's just keeping with management of your class too, so that was in time with like Mary and being pulled out, aides were pulled out from like kindergarten and first grade. So it was really just the classroom teacher to try to manage providing intervention needs to students in the class.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, there are public, yes.
I now have a question, after Jill's question and discussion.
Come over to the
thereafter.
microphone.
If you wouldn't mind, yeah. And just introduce yourself as well.
So my name is Jennifer Mercurio. I know many of you. And my question is simply, why did it go away 5 years ago? It's a significant amount of time, so there's no blame or anything going on, but was it a cost-saving measure? I understand what the reasoning was for, it was a cost-saving measure.
Yes, we were told the money wasn't in the budget at that point to be able to add additional staff.
Or if, because Mrs. Karp, you were helping children at that time, so your line essentially was reallocated as a second grade teacher or a teacher of a grade? Okay.
Dual certified, and there were more special ed kids coming into the district. There was more need. Those kids had an IEP that is mandated. Those services had to be filled. So I let my job I just got reassigned.
Right, so instead of hiring a new special ed teacher to meet those extra kid needs, she was transferred to special ed and it eliminated the reading position.
So possibly, and one would actually need to go and talk to those parents, I guess, but one could argue that many people were going for IEPs for their children to try to get extra help, right? Because they weren't getting a sufficient amount of extra help that they needed. So potentially in future, to everybody, if there is a reallocation of funding, I'm not saying this is going to happen anytime soon, but let's just say something like that happens, it may behoove all of us, including the journalists in the room, to put word out on the street that parents who have children who are being impacted by these services now, that we should all make sure whoever's on the board at that time knows how profound the services are and what a profound effect they have on these students' lives. So I just wanted to clarify your, thank you.
We actually have some routine business to attend to.
Should let the teachers go.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, guys. By the way, I was...
Take offense if we actually leave, right?
No, I thought it went without saying that it was not something you needed to need or want to stick around for.
Thank you.
Having said that,
Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Having said that, we have...
No, John.
John's got to go.
John.
Doesn't matter. All right, we have a consent agenda with only a few items on it. So resolve the Board of Education of Garrison Union Free School District approves the consent agenda items B through E as presented. Item B is to accept the minutes of our last October 25th board meeting. Item C is to accept or approve the CSE recommendations. Both of those are in your package. Item D is approve the appointment of Patrick O'Halloran, Megan Rohan, and Megan Rohan as substitute teachers for the 2017-18 school year at a daily rate of $85. And item last is approve Karen Bresnan to provide music department curriculum planning support at the rate of $30 per hour for a maximum of 10 hours.
So moved.
I need a second. Any questions for Laura on any of that? What's Karen doing?
Supporting our new music teacher.
And that's just a means of getting him up to speed. Okay, fine. All those in favor?
Aye.
No abstentions, no nays. We have two action items, I think. Yep.
Yep.
All right. Resolve the Board of Education, this is to establish the standard workday. This is something we have to do every year. It is a pro forma undertaking. Resolve the Board of Education of Garrison Union Free School District hereby establishes a 5-day work week at 7.5 hours per day as a standard workday for the positions of tax collector and claims auditor for the purpose of determining days work reportable to the New York State and local employees retirement system.
So moved.
I need a second. Any questions for Laura on that? This is,
Beth always loves to.
we just formalize, this is formalizing what we know already. All right, all those in favor? The resolution is pretty, no abstentions, no nays. That was unanimous. No, thank you. And basically the same thing for a different position. Resolve the Board of Education Garrison Union Free School District hereby adopts a standard workday reporting resolution for elected and appointed officials as attached, and that attachment is in your package.
So moved.
Give me a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. No abstentions, no nays. The next agenda item is board member comment. We've all had lots to say tonight, but if anybody has anything else, now is the time to raise it.
I want to bring up again Courtney's proposal that we shift public comment to the beginning of the month.
You missed that.
Yes,
You missed that.
the subject was addressed at, well, I won't say at some length, but it was addressed at our last board meeting. The fact that we,
Definitely at some length.
yeah, at some length.
Yeah.
The fact that we, in fact, accelerated public comment tonight is a reflection of the outcomes of that discussion. It was also agreed that we would be mindful that when there was substantive discussions like the ones we had tonight, which attracted parents and others from the community, we would, as appropriate, invite public comment earlier in the session than we might otherwise. So I think that was to everybody's satisfaction. And if there's nothing else, then resolve the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District adjourns its regular meeting on November 15th.
So moved. Seconded.
All those in favor say aye. I should have concluded with a thank you to John, and a thank you to Laura and the teachers and to the questions and comments we had from everybody. It really was, as James said, and I completely agree, the most substantive discussions we've had in recent memory. So thank you all for your contributions to it as well. Thank you, and thank you all. No executive session tonight, nothing to discuss in executive session.